I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss the ramifications of the historic American strike on Iran's nuclear sites and how we should read Tehran's foreign minister's scramble to Moscow. Plus, we feature a special dispatch from Gotland, Sweden, to meet the armed forces' newest outfit protecting Europe's strategic Baltic outpost from Russia.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Monday, the 23rd of June, 3 years and 120 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, and later, co-host of our sister podcast Battle Lines, Venetia Rainey. But first, over to Dom for the latest military developments.
Let's start in Ukraine, northeast, just north of Sumy. Ukraine has taken back some of the land there from that Russian lodgement. They've been there for a few weeks now, slowly, very slowly moving forward. They've got up to the road that runs sort of northeast out of Sumy Oblast into Russia, into Kursk Oblast and towards the city of Sudzha. So Russia's sort of got up to that road. A chunk has been taken back by Ukraine over the weekend. No other movement there in that area over the weekend, although it's worth noting that Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief General Alexander Syrsky, speaking yesterday, he said the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk Oblast, and the continued Ukrainian counterattacks in northern Sumy Oblast had in recent months prevented Russia redeploying 60,000 troops, he said, from Kursk to reinforce offensive operations by Russia in the Liman, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson areas. I think you're just taking a bit of a retrospective, but there's clearly still movement happening in that area. So it's all a little bit confusing about what he was referring to. Now, the Institute for the Study of War, US-based think tank, notes that a prominent Russian mill blogger said yesterday that Russia's summer offensive has mainly consisted of the same grinding operations, the meat assaults that we've been seeing Russia try to conduct for about a year and a half. The mill blogger said the situation along the front line is unlikely to significantly change during summer 2025, adding that Ukrainian forces are conducting an organised defence throughout the front line. There is social media chat from Telegraph purporting to come from a number of Russian units in that Sumy area saying that they are under intense pressure from Ukraine. Now, that idea, that sort of very limited, no significant change, it seems to bear out with what we've been seeing. You may remember there was much talk of the heralded Russian spring offensive some time ago. Well, we are through spring now, and so that much feared spring offensive seems to have turned into this small push into Sumy region that has stalled on the main road. Russian press and Russian MOD now talking up a big Russian summer offensive. And it is having some effect, I'm not going to deny it. The more gullible or bored, that might be a fairer interpretation, Western media outlets keep issuing doom-laden headlines about imminent Russian advances, but nothing's really changed on the ground. So if there was a Russian spring offensive, it's been and gone. That might have been that thing up in Sumy, and we await with fear and trepidation, or maybe not, the Russian summer offensive. Otherwise, over the weekend, very, very small moves in the east, mostly a little bit towards the southeast of Liman, but that's pretty much it. Now then, in that press briefing on Sunday where he was speaking, I mentioned earlier General Syrsky, he said Russia has approximately 695,000 troops in Ukraine, with a further 13 divisions and an unspecified number of independent regiments and brigades in its strategic reserve, that reserve totalling about 120,000. Now, they are assessed as poor quality, hence we've seen this repeated pattern of the meat assaults. ISW say that Russian forces already appear to have the manpower advantage in their priority frontline areas, which we think is the Donbass, but they are struggling to overcome that gap which in some places up to kind of 20 kilometres, that sort of contested zone where the drones rule, basically. So it's very, very difficult. Drones in a defensive battle, such as this is for Ukraine, or in a very static line, shall we say, drones have basically removed surprise from the battlefield. Exceptionally difficult to generate surprise and to hence get into the enemy position and undermine them, and they collapse backwards, etc., etc. That's just not happening with the drones holding that zone in between them. Now, ISW says that this is unlikely to change. They say a significant influx of manpower is unlikely to help Russia address that issue. Now, elsewhere, Russia has continued the pattern of recent months, just using air power to hit civilian areas. Last night, Kyiv was hit with a mass missile and drone attack. It killed 7, injured 25, the last time I checked the stats before coming in here. The attack started in the early hours of this morning and was said to last for about 3.5 hours. The heaviest damage and the site of most of those deaths occurred in the central Shevchenkivsky district when a 5-storey building partially collapsed after being hit by a ballistic missile. That was reporting from Ukraine's MOD. The Air Force says that Russia fired 368 aerial weapons, including 352 drones, 11 Iskander-M or KN-23 ballistic missiles, and 5 Iskander-K cruise missiles, mostly at the capital city, and most of those munitions were shot down. A couple more from me, Francis. Last night, in his daily address, President Zelensky said Norway is going to invest $400 million in Ukraine's defence industry to support drone and air defence missile production. It came after a visit by Norwegian Defence Minister Tore Unshus Sandvik, and I apologise if I've got that wrong. He was in the country over the weekend. Now, Norway's largest defence company, the Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace, they've already opened an office in Ukraine as part of this cooperation, and the focus, we are told, is going to be on producing missiles for NASAMS, the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System. Next one, New Zealand has announced a new $16 million New Zealand dollar package, that's about $9.5 million US dollars, package of support for Ukraine ahead of the NATO summit starting tomorrow in The Hague. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon said, New Zealand stands in solidarity with Ukraine. Its war of defence is well into its 4th year, and our condemnation of Russia's illegal full-scale invasion remains undiminished. Foreign Minister Winston Peters said the defence of Ukraine has significant implications not only for the security of the Euro-Atlantic area, but also for the Indo-Pacific. We must continue to work with others in the international community to uphold a rules-based order that serves all our interests. Now, God knows how many times the letter E was mangled into an I across both those statements, but we're told, as well as humanitarian aid, some of the money will go on the UK and Latvia-led drone coalition for Ukraine. And just the last one for me, and I know we can't ignore the attack over the weekend on Iran's nuclear sites. On that attack, and specifically the implications of any reprisals and impact on Ukraine, I think it's worth noting that many of the US bases in the region don't have missile defences in any significant quantity. Now, the US could seek to push Aegis missile defence vessels, ships, surface platforms into the Gulf, but that would be quite an aggressive and risky act and would probably require a forcible entry of about a dozen or more ships. And anyway, the US bases in Jordan, Syria, Turkey and Iraq probably won't be covered if there were any Aegis-capable missile ships in the Gulf. So what does all this mean? Why am I talking about it? Is Donald Trump going to pull Patriot missile batteries out of Europe or Asia, potentially? And, possibly more importantly, will he deny the sale of Patriots to Ukraine? Even if he was so minded, and there's not been much evidence of that, if he was so minded to allow them to buy it in anticipation of the US needing increased base defence across CENTCOM's area, I wonder. Anyone closer to the action than me? Anyone in CENTCOM? I'd be interested to hear what you feel about your base missile defence and whether or not you think the Patriots are going to be coming your way as opposed to donated or indeed sold to Ukraine. And that's us up to date, Francis.
Well, thanks, Dom. I also want to begin with the consequences of the events in Iran, though, as the EU's Kaja Kallas said this morning, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that while all eyes are on the Middle East, people are dying in Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine every day. President Trump's decision to strike at Iran's nuclear sites has seemingly not had any impact on Russia's risk threshold when it comes to hitting civilian targets. Deterrence is not back, as some headlines have liked to suggest this morning. We've already speculated in previous episodes as to the potential cost on the Ukraine theatre of what is unfolding in the Middle East. It's telling that Tehran's foreign minister arrived in Moscow today to meet with Putin, referring to Russia as a friend. Hardly surprising, given the political cover and financial deals regarding drones Moscow's provided over the years since the full-scale invasion. The best summary I've seen so far of the impact of all this is by Professor Mark Galeotti in The Spectator. He writes, and I quote, "Moscow is an active participant in Tehran's civilian nuclear program, which inevitably fed through to its military one. But the two countries, while sharing know-how on sanctions busting against the Western world order, were also geopolitical competitors in Middle East and even Central Asia and the South Caucasus. It is undoubtedly an embarrassment to see Russian-supplied air defences swept aside so easily. It's also considered by some in Moscow to be a provocation, not so much because they care about Iran, but because, as the Israelis and now even Trump talk about this in terms not simply of preemptive response to a nuclear threat, but a campaign for regime change, this hits a particularly sore spot. Putin and his hawkish cronies have long believed that the US has been behind a long-term campaign of hybrid war projects to topple regimes in which it is opposed. The truth is that there is very little Moscow can do beyond gesture politics. It is neither able nor willing to project meaningful force in support of Tehran. Even sending the latest S-500 air defense systems would both diminish Russia's own defenses against Ukrainian attacks and take too long to bring into operation. Although Russia and Iran signed a strategic partnership this year, it includes no obligation of mutual military assistance. But, Professor Galeotti concludes by saying this, in the global south, the US can now be portrayed as a thuggish pawn of Zionist interests and an untrustworthy interlocutor. Sceptical audiences in Europe can be regaled with warnings that they risk being sucked into Trump and Netanyahu's war. More generally, for all that, there is obviously no real comparison between Kyiv and Tehran. The Russians will claim that they, too, were simply making a preemptive attack in Ukraine to protect their own security. However ridiculous the parallel may sound, there will be some who buy it. And I should just say as a tangent that Dom is going to explore that in his final thought. But Mark concludes, more practically, turmoil in the Middle East pushes up oil prices and that restocks Putin's war chest. It gives Moscow more credibility with other Arab states, which are so important to it, both for managing oil prices and also as gateways through which to launder money and bypass sanctions. And although Trump rejected Putin's initial offer of mediations, for the Russians, it raises the delicious vision of their being able to step in at some point and be the peacemakers and do Washington a favour on which they can collect. It's an ill wind. So we'll link to that very interesting analysis in the show notes, which I've had to abridge there. Just for context on that last point, about 20% of the world's petroleum and a huge share of the world's LNG passes through the 20-mile-wide Strait of Hormuz, which Iran's parliament voted to close over the weekend. The US is putting pressure on Beijing to try and strong-arm Tehran to keep it open. But if they fail, then it will impact the global energy market with potential dividends for Putin. In the context of Professor Galeotti's assessment, I thought it would be interesting to just discuss briefly US Vice President J.D. Vance's remarks, where he said, Iran having and nuclear proliferation in the Middle East is a disaster for pretty much everybody. It's one of the few issues where Russia, China and the United States have broad agreement. The reason I just thought I'd draw attention to that is that it underscores the point that this affords diplomatic opportunities for Moscow, which is why some have speculated there might have been some kind of deal struck behind closed doors between the White House and the Kremlin in one of those calls between Putin and Trump. But I should stress there is no evidence of any such pact. Most experts seem to believe Moscow was caught off guard by this. Nonetheless, in recent days, Putin's rhetoric in relation to Ukraine has become noticeably more bellicose. On Friday, after our broadcast, he told the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that all of Ukraine belonged to Russia, adding, wherever the foot of a Russian soldier steps is Russian land. That underscores Russia's intention to continue occupying more than just the 5 Ukrainian regions Moscow has illegally laid claim to. You'll recall that Putin's forces recently crossed into Dnipropetrovsk, which is not one of the 5. Now, in brighter news, Belarusian opposition leader and political prisoner Siarhei Tsikhanouski was released on June 21st, shortly after Alexander Lukashenko met in Minsk with Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. Now, you may recall Dom interviewed his wife, Svetlana, on the podcast over a year ago, who became the main opposition candidate in his stead. Her husband was a popular blogger who planned to challenge Lukashenko in the 2020 presidential election and was arrested shortly before the vote and later sentenced to 18 years in prison on what was widely reported as being politically motivated charges. At least 13 political detainees were also released this weekend, including 3 Polish citizens, 2 from Latvia, 1 from Estonia, 1 from Sweden, 1 from the US and 2 from Japan. Kellogg's deputy, John Cole, said the released political prisoners had been transferred to Vilnius and expressed gratitude to the Lithuanian government. He said, and I quote, "Trump's strong leadership led to the release of 14 prisoners from Belarus today. Thanks to the Lithuanian government for its cooperation and assistance. They remain a true friend and ally." Now, the Kyiv Independent are monitoring this very closely and would add a link to that piece in the show notes, which is being refreshed as we speak. But to end this segment, let's turn to Ukraine's allies. President Zelensky is visiting Great Britain today, speaking with Keir Starmer to discuss joint defence protection, which will probably see an agreement on manufacturing. There are also plans for him to speak to a select group of journalists afterwards, and Ukraine the Latest and the Telegraph will be there. It comes amid concern that there will be no formal Ukraine meeting at the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague. It seems that to placate Trump, they've decided not to risk it. Read into that what you will. Rutte's confidence at Chatham House a few weeks ago that all countries were to commit 5% in short order on their defence spending has also gone awry. Spain will be exempt, we learn, from spending 5% of its GDP on defence after striking a deal with NATO. That's coming from the country's Prime Minister, who is speaking ahead of the summit that starts this week. Pedro Sanchez said that he'd achieved a success for his country by securing an exemption from the new spending target, which had been billed as a strict requirement for all 32 NATO members. So not the best of starts for this summit, which of course we will be monitoring very closely this week. Those are the key military and political updates, but let's stay with NATO now and bring you a special dispatch from Sweden. The Telegraph's Venetia Rainey travelled to Gotland Island recently to meet the Swedish Armed Forces' newest outfit, the Gotland regiment, who are charged with protecting this strategically vital Baltic outpost from Russia. You'll hear the international military drills which took place there, including Britain's elite 16th Air Assault Brigade parachuting out of planes, and an overnight march to capture a tactical landing zone. Unsurprisingly, those soldiers stationed there are clear-eyed about the threat Moscow poses to Northern Europe.
So I'm on a small turboprop plane heading over the Baltic Sea from Stockholm Airport to Visby, which is the main city on Gotland. Gotland is a small Swedish island. It's a bit smaller than the county of Essex in the UK or the state of Rhode Island in the US. It's largely known as a tourist destination here in Scandinavia, but that's not why I'm going there. Gotland is around 190 miles from Kaliningrad, which is the Russian enclave where they house their Baltic fleet. And that makes Gotland a really strategic outpost for NATO. I'm just looking out the window now and I can see lots of tiny islands as we leave the Swedish coastline. But other than that, ahead of me I can just see an endless stretch of the Baltic. Now, under the Baltic, there are these really important data and communications subsea cables, as well as gas and electricity pipelines. There have been quite a few instances of sabotage over the last few years, and if Gotland fell to the Russians, all of that would be under Moscow's control. So I'm going to find out how Sweden and its NATO allies are making sure that that never happens.
Welcome to Gotland Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened and leave the aisle free from all cabin luggage.
It's a windy, overcast day when I land at Visby Airport. After dropping my bags at my accommodation, I head to the freshly built headquarters of the new Gotland regiment that was established just a few years ago.
just ask me questions if you have those. And
I'm joining some international and local journalists on a tour of the barracks. Our guide is Thomas Angshammer, who's head of communications for the P18 Gotland Regiment.
Let's jump into the vehicles.
It's a mix of sleek Scandi-style buildings, some trees and construction sites. It feels like a mini village in the making.
We'll cut down some trees over there. We're going to build more storage over there.
We move away from the building site to outside the new barracks, but it's no less noisy. As an army helicopter flies nearby, Thomas explains the history of the regiment.
21 years ago, Gotland Regiment was the last of the 4 regiments on Gotland to be decommissioned, because times were, as you know, quite different back then. This seemed like a good idea at the time, and just a couple of years later, it wasn't such a good idea anymore. And little by little, the political processes started to go forward. And then, of course, in 2014, we all know what happened. So the Defence Bill of 2015 was when the decision was made to re-establish a permanent military presence on Gotland. In the meantime, we only had the Home Guard after the regiments were closed down. When we were going to build new military presence on Gotland, unfortunately the old regiments had been sold. We had no infrastructure left, or almost no infrastructure left. So this is the corner of the training field. This was all forest just a few years ago. And as you will see very soon, little by little we started building new infrastructure for the new regiment. The building you saw when we were driving in, that was here, because that was built for the Home Guard. So this is the new barracks. It was opened in August last year. It has room for 240 conscripts. And in August of this year, it's too small, because we're going to have 300 conscripts this year. And in a few years, we'll probably be up to maybe 500 per year. So we're building a second barracks behind this one, and we're planning for a third. I think we can go inside for a quick look. So this is where the conscripts live. 12 every room.
Men and women share the same room here in Sweden. It's all gender neutral. When conscription was reintroduced for all 18-year-olds back in 2017, it was decided to include women as well as men. Some of those female recruits were sent here to Gotland, including Anna Bredin, who is now a battle captain.
So I started with a detachment here, and then it became a regiment, so I continue my position here.
And why did you want to come here? Did you want to come here?
Yeah, I was voluntarily. I applied to go to the island. It's a great place to live. The population here, they are really great. They are kind, and the support for military is really high. And nature and geographic is beautiful. And there's a lot of history here, especially from the medieval age. So it's a really interesting place to live on. And then we have, of course, the importance of the defense of and on Gotland.
The Gotland Regiment is banking on that appeal to boost their numbers as fast as possible. As a completely new regiment, P18 needs every man and woman it can get. Local Gotland residents who know the island like the back of their hand are a prime target for recruitment. Numbers were small at first, but they're now picking up. Last year, the regiment got nearly 120 new recruits, and next year they expect more than 200.
A regiment is basically a factory. That's where we produce the wartime units. And we are roughly 400 people working full-time at Gotland Regiment. And that includes soldiers, officers and civilians. And we are producing the wartime organization Brigade Combat Team Gotland, which when it's fully developed will be about 4,500 to 5,000 men fully mobilized.
When's the aspiration for getting to that 4,000, 5,000 figure?
In a couple of years, yeah.
Are you on track?
Yes, we're on track.
Gotland's brigade combat team will eventually include everything from an infantry battalion, an artillery company, to a logistics hub, an explosives ordnance disposal platoon. But the team revolves around the mechanised battalion, essentially a group of soldiers who operate armoured personnel carriers and other combat vehicles, including tanks. What kit do you guys have? What weapons, vehicles?
So CV90s, Leopards, or Stridsvagn 122 in Swedish, and different variants of the combat vehicle. That's the main kit for us.
Inside a giant hangar, we get to see some of their vehicles up close.
So these vehicles we see in this garage is 5 different variants of the CV90 family. We have the classic CV90 for carrying armored infantry, sort of call. We have the recovery vehicle to recover damaged vehicles on the battlefield. We have anti-air system. We have the latest in the Swedish Armed Forces, the armored mortar CV90. And we have the fire support team combat vehicle. So it's 5 different variants of the same family.
I'm just going to climb inside here. Oh, it's quite spacious inside, actually. Once you get all the way into the main bit of the body of the mortar vehicle, you can stand up and you can see where all of the ammo shells would sit, waiting to be loaded up. And then there are 2 fold-down seats for the gunners. The soldier I spoke to earlier gives me and another journalist a demonstration of how it all works.
Take the grenade, put it here, push it up to this level here. You push this one up into the loading tube that you can see from the outside. Then we lift the loading tube and push it over. The grenade falls down the barrel. Then from here we can fire.
And this guy fires?
Exactly, the tank commander.
From the instruction from the other vehicle that were just on?
Exactly.
Awesome.
Do you guys get to go out in this much?
Yeah, we've been 4 weeks in the mainland exercising. So we shot over 1,000 live grenades in the mainland.
Can I ask your name?
Alexander Freigard.
And how long have you been with the Gotland regiment?
I've been working here since 2018.
So when it just started, why did you want to join?
For me, it was a fresh start. I'm from the southern part of Sweden. To move to an island in the middle of the sea sounded exciting.
Great, so just a bit of life balance, not anything in particular about this sort of particular challenge of...
No, when I set out to do my military education, I was only planning to do my 9 months conscript, then I was going to be a firefighter. But here I am 7 years later. Yeah.
What kind of scenarios do you train for here in the Gotland regiment?
We train for everything. To always be prepared. We train for someone to come by sea, by air. That's the only way to get here. So that's where we train for.
And then I guess, yeah, defending the island. What are the island's weak spots? Without wanting to give too much away to the Russians. It's an island, so it's got natural fortifications, but what are the difficulties in defending an island?
I can't answer that question.
The Russians could be listening. Russia looms large here on Gotland Island. The Russian enclave of Kaliningrad is less than 200 miles away, home to Moscow's storied Baltic fleet. In the 18th century, that fleet fought multiple wars with Sweden's navy. Sweden was officially neutral during the Cold War, but it built up extensive defences to deter any attack from the Soviet Union regardless. After the end of the Cold War, the threat from Russia was deemed to have disappeared. Europe was at peace. Places like Gotland Island were completely demilitarised. but not everyone believed in the end of history.
Russia has always been Russia, and predicting the future is a hazardous business. So, of course, I did not see the point or the value in that decision, no matter what it was based on.
Colonel Dan Rasmussen is head of the Gotland Regiment and a native Gotlander. He was an officer here back when it was disbanded, and when P18 was formally re-established again, he was serving elsewhere in the Swedish army.
Being originally from the regiment, it was a great day for me personally, when common sense in a way was on the agenda again.
Colonel Rasmussen is clear-eyed about the threat Russia poses and about the importance of this little island for protecting Northern Europe. In Baltic war games conducted by the US and NATO allies since the annexation of Crimea, Russia's first move is often to try to take Gotland. I ask him why.
Because of its geographic position in the Baltic Sea. Because with some sensors and systems based on this island, you can more or less dictate who flies and sails in and around the Baltic Sea. And that, of course, has consequences for the countries surrounding Gotland, if we take a Gotlandic point of view. That means that Sweden and NATO has to be in possession of the island. Otherwise, reinforcements within the NATO context will be a problem.
Can you explain that a bit to me? Because I was just looking at the map and we're talking about reinforcement and resupply to Baltic nations, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Why is Gotland so central to that? Why couldn't you come through Poland or down through Finland?
First of all, the Finnish forces, the forces up north, they are dedicated for the Arctic and for the terrain up north. And with a quick glance on a map, looking at Poland and Lithuania, you will see that the Suwalki corridor, with Belarus on one side and Kaliningrad on the other side, presents a major challenge in order to reinforce by land. And then that leaves then the air and the sea for reinforcements, and that's where Gotland comes in as key terrain.
What would a Russian invasion of this island, hypothetically of course, what would it look like? What kind of scenarios does the Gotland Regiment prepare for?
It's more or less the same as we've always been prepared for. We've had nationally tried to have as much troops on the island as possible in order to create some kind of deterrence, that it would cost more to try to take the island than to leave it alone. And now within the NATO context, it's deterrence on a different scale. And we have prepared for some kind of bombardment, of course, which is the prerequisite for any landing by air or sea in order to affect the defenses on Gotland. And back in the Cold War era, it was maybe landing by ships. That was the formula for invading Gotland. But now the technology has evolved, so a lot of harassing can be done from a distance with drones, with ballistic missiles and so on. And that is a prerequisite for how it starts before you put any boots on the ground.
Even in peacetime, defending the island comes with its own problems. Sabotage of undersea cables is increasingly common, and Moscow is believed to be responsible. A shadow Russian fleet operates in the seas around the island. The Gotland Regiment has to be ready for anything.
We don't have any tasks or possibilities to operate on the sea. That's the Navy's job. But we do it by enhancing the total defense on the island, by cooperating and coordinating with civilian authorities, municipality and also private stakeholders in order to prepare for being cut off. The challenges are the reinforcements and the sustainability, of course, and that's why we are trying to make sure that we have stocks, we have the equipment on the island. That's what we are planning for. So the only big movements for us in the brigade combat team is the personnel that has to be shipped from the mainland to Gotland. We don't want to have a big operation with a lot of equipment as well. So that's the big challenges. On the other hand, the pros is that we are living and breathing here on the island. The Home Guard, they know every path, every road, every suspicious person showing up. It's a home game for us.
So this is an island that's ready for war at the drop of a hat?
In a way, yes.
Exactly what that war would look like if it did break out is anyone's guess. But one of the more extreme scenarios involves Russia capturing the island, allowing it to control key sea routes and cut off resupply efforts to the Baltic states. If that happened, for all their training, the plucky Gotland regiment would need outside help, and fast. Luckily, with Sweden now a member of NATO, Article 5 would kick in. An armed attack against one NATO member is considered an attack against all. An international coalition of NATO members would quickly be assembled. Some paratroopers would then have to land on the island and secure a runway to bring in weapons and reinforcements in order to retake Gotland. That's roughly the scenario that British, American and Swedish forces came together to practice last month as part of the swift response phase of the US-led annual Defender military drill series. Standing in a field, bathed in blazing afternoon sunshine, I join a group of journalists, soldiers and medics to watch the start of the exercise. So as you can hear, the exercise has begun. That sound is the roar of an A400 plane, and dozens of British soldiers behind me are parachuting down. They're all from the 16th Air Assault Brigade, and this may be a drill, but it's a big deal. This is the first UK jump into Gotland and the first tactical jump out of an A400, so it also involves the RAF. The 16th Brigade are the real deal. They're the British Army's global response force, and basically they have to be ready at a moment's notice to respond to a crisis anywhere in the world. The evacuation of Kabul, aid deliveries after the massive Turkey earthquake, Sudan civil war repatriations, they were there. They're specially trained to deploy by parachute, helicopter and air landing, and this is them doing what they do best. The two A400 planes each come around a handful of times, depositing dozens of paratroopers into the field below. Slowly, each one packs up his parachute and trudges over to the mobile border control truck to clear immigration. I guess there's some bureaucracy that even major military drills can't get past. I grab one of the soldiers as he walks past. How did it feel coming out the plane?
Yeah, it was great, to be fair. It's first time jumping overseas, so good experience.
Anything particular about jumping out of an A400? I know the British troops haven't done that before.
Yeah, I think it's the slipstream you get, so when you leave you get a good exit.
Nice, perfect conditions for it.
Yeah, exactly, perfect weather.
And a nice soft landing.
Yeah, not bad, to be fair. I've had worse.
What's going through your mind as the ground gets closer?
Just get tight and get your legs ready, prepare yourself, prepare for what's next.
And then you guys have to collect your parachutes because this is a drill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That pack looks heavy.
Yes, it is quite heavy, yeah.
Thanks very much for chatting to me.
Hello, passport control is further down. Yes. Perfect, thank you very much.
Standing alongside me in the field and proudly watching everything is Brigadier Mark Berry, commander of the 16th Air Assault Brigade, the ones who've just jumped out of the plane.
It's a very exhilarating thing for soldiers to do.
I guess you've done quite a few of these.
Yeah, I've done quite a few over my career, yeah. But every single one is as exhilarating as the last.
This sort of exercise, what kind of real-world situations does this prepare you for?
Seizing this piece of terrain, a viable landing zone for parachutists, and then defending Sweden, supporting the Swedes defend their nation against any aggressor. You could replicate exactly this scenario in any part of Europe. Last year, for example, this exercise series was in Estonia, and we practiced a very similar scenario on a tactical landing zone in Estonia. From my perspective as 16th Brigade Commander, one of the most important firsts is what you've just seen here is the first time we have dropped what we call the lead company group. So the highest readiness soldiers out of an A400. That says to me that the A400 and my capability are working well, and we are ready to respond to any adversary, as we've just described. The next most significant thing is that we have launched this exercise from the United Kingdom, and we have landed in Sweden. The mere fact that we are jumping into a piece of Swedish terrain that we have been enabled by Swedish Air Force to do that. The fact that we can see from where we're standing Swedish medics, Swedish soldiers standing around supporting the jump. I mean, you don't get much more obvious example of cooperation there. And as you well know, it's relatively new for us to be operating this closely with Sweden, and so it's a brilliant opportunity to understand how they operate, for them to understand how we operate, and just to get to know each other a bit better. So all of this is a really encouraging representation of what is happening across Europe. Armies working together, armies building capability, as you say, responding to the most obvious threat that we face along our border at the moment, and getting better.
Once the soldiers have all cleared passport control, the rest of the exercise can begin. I walk a short distance from the field where everyone landed, the drop zone in army jargon, and I meet the man in charge of the troops. They'll shortly begin their march to their destination.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hitchens, Commanding Officer of 2 Para. We are in Gotland. We've just landed by parachute on a drop zone which is about 2 k's from our objective, which is a stretch of road which can double up as a runway. So we're going to seize that, and then we're going to enable follow-on forces to come in and project power from here to wherever it needs to be.
And what are the guys doing right now, gathered in the woods?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, you land on a drop zone, you're all pretty spread out. There were a few issues that had to be resolved, like passport control, and we couldn't bring food into the country, so we've had to have a quick sort of administrative stop to get rations and check passports and things. That aside, what we would do now is we'd rally. The OC would gather his people, and when he reached a pre-designated number of people, so in this case it was about 70%, he'll be good to go and seize the objective.
The OC?
The officer commanding the company.
And can you talk me through, this is for radio obviously so no one can see, what kit you've got on you, what you've got in your backpack?
So you can see that I'm wearing body armour, you can see I have got belt kit, you can see I'm big and I weigh a lot, which means I couldn't carry very much in my parachute because I fall too quickly. So I'm going to have a cold night tonight. But yeah, it would be pretty typical of paratroopers in this kind of scenario to travel light. You know, we'd say bullets and beans. So it's, you know, ammunition is a priority, a bit of food, a bit of water, and some communications equipment.
One of the doors on the planes didn't open, right, when they were doing the drill?
Yes.
How do you respond to that?
So in a real life scenario, it might not be just the door going, it might be an aircraft that can't take off, and so we have a thing called a bump plan. So you work out who is most important to the mission, and you jig people around. So you saw the door broke. There would have been quite a lot of activity in the back of the aircraft going, if we can only get another 15 people out, who does it need to be? And they'll have got the mission critical people out. Thankfully for the remainder, they're going to land down the road and they're going to get bussed in, so it's not the end of the world.
So I'm standing in a field just next to where the soldiers parachuted in. They've gathered, they've had a bit of a briefing, they've got their rations, their supplies, picked up their kit. Now they're heading out, they're moving across this field, and they're going to march a couple of kilometres to the tactical landing zone, where they're going to try to convert an old road into a runway, where they can receive planes with weapons. There's an eerie silence over the scene. You can hear birds in the background, but the soldiers are completely quiet. Lots of hand signals being made to each other. They're in full-blown exercise mode now, and I've been asked to keep my voice down so I don't interrupt them or ask them questions while they're making tactical plans on the march over. The sun's just gone down here. It's a really beautiful evening. And the soldiers' camo gear, which was really obvious to see at first in the sharp sunlight, is now starting to blend in with the woods and the long grass. So it's starting to feel a lot more realistic. It's almost completely dark now. The sky still has some light patches in, but on the ground it's pretty hard to see anything unless it's moving. What are you doing? What's your role?
I'm coordinating where the enemy are.
Where are the enemy?
Close. That way, yeah.
Okay.
imagine something they might bump into them now. But they've so they chose to not just come straight down. They've moved around in a sort of big left-hand movement. That's just based off of where they think the enemy expected them to come from. So it's taken a bit longer, but it gains them the element of sort of surprise.
And that's all been decided by the troops just as they were on this march, on the company.
The company commander has the sort of overall controls of anything that's moving on the ground. They've also taken a bit of extra time to put up sort of UAS and drones to do a soak, so a soak of just looking at the area around. But yeah, they're hopefully going to start clearing through soon.
It feels pretty realistic, I have to say.
Do you think?
It does to me.
It does. No, it's good. That's good then. That's good.
But I don't have my night vision goggles on. I can't see much at this point.
It's going to get... Someone's found a fence there. Yeah, it's going to start getting pretty difficult, so I'm going to try and catch up to my guys.
Catch you later. So we can hear the first enemy engagement. Looks like the combat element of this mission has begun.
Before we step off, just a reminder, if we come under contact, remember what we spoke about in all this. We fucking treat them like conscripts, and remember our job here is to roll them up and send them back. They will withdraw, put pressure on them, and take the fight to them. No fucking about, simple as. Right, when you're ready, move off.
We're pressing ahead of the company that we just heard the commanding officer of. Going to try and get a bit closer to the action. Well, I'm walking through the woods parallel to the tactical landing zone, the road that they're going to turn into a runway. I'm walking parallel to it for several hours. It's nearly 1 a.m. now. And we're just walking onto it now. I'm going to go take a bit of a break. You can hear some gunfire in the background. They're still securing it. Still some enemy presence around. But we're going to go get a break, have a bit of food, and recharge our batteries.
The plan is to stay and watch American military transport planes conduct touch-and-go landings, essentially simulating dropping off rocket launch systems and more soldiers. But I'm done. All that stumbling around in the dark has exhausted me, so I head back to my accommodation for a few hours of sleep. At 5 a.m, feeling slightly perkier, I drive to the Tofta firing range to watch the very end of the exercise. This involves British and American troops simultaneously firing missiles from their respective multiple rocket launch systems, the ones the transport planes practiced dropping off earlier. Rockets fired, the British and American troops pack up their things and drive off, leaving the sound of birds to once again fill the early morning air. The exercise is over. It's a powerful show of how NATO allies would come together in the event of a Russian incursion. But back in the real world, I wonder how much of this cuts through to ordinary people. The locals here on Gotland lie awake, worried that Russia might invade at any moment. Are they happy that the island has been remilitarised?
Sorry, do you guys speak English? Yeah. Are you locals?
Yes.
Okay, I work for a British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. That video.
To find out, I've come to Gotland's centre, Visby. It's a lovely medieval city, right on the sea, where I find locals swimming during their lunch break.
You've just come out of a dip in the water. Was it cold?
Nah, 8 degrees maybe. Quite refreshing, to be honest. But we are both winter swimmers, so we're quite used to it, but it was lovely.
What's your name?
My name is Tove.
And you live here in Gotland?
Yes, I do, but I'm originally from the south of Sweden, a town called Malmö. But I live here since 10 years ago, so...
Okay. And what do you think about the talk about a Russian threat of invading this island?
Well, I'm not actually quite bothered about it, because there has been a threat lying in there for as long as the Gotlandians can remember. So, no, I'm not particularly worried. And my personal opinion is that if Putin wanted to invade this island, he would have done so like 50 years ago. And I don't think he has the army enough to do it. And, well, no, I don't think so.
So you feel safe here? You probably know that they re-established a Gotland regiment of the Swedish army here some years ago.
Yeah.
Does it make you feel safer that exists?
I would say neither. I mean, we don't see them often. We can hear them, and I think for a lot of people it's causing kind of troubles because they are preventing people from building houses where they want to and building schools and stuff. So, yeah,
just getting in the way.
Yeah, kind of. But I guess it's good because in some way we might need it.
What's your name?
My name is Marie Eriksson.
And you're from?
I'm from Gothenburg, the west coast, and I'm here to visit the beautiful Gotland, Visby. I love it.
It is very beautiful there, and it's a lovely sunny day.
Yes, today it's really nice. It's a little bit cold, but it doesn't matter.
And you were just taking in the view of the sea. Did you notice that you were sitting right next to an old World War II bunker?
No, but now, yes. When you say it, yes, I see it, yeah. I didn't think about it, but just relaxing and watching the sea and listening to the sea and, yes, enjoying.
One of the things I'm here to report on is obviously Sweden joined NATO last year, and the rising Russian threat. Gotland Island is obviously very important.
Yes.
Is that something that you think about much, that worries you much?
Well, I've been thinking about it. I know we talked a little bit about it some days ago with the friends because it's a very special place to be here. So, yes, I've been thinking about it, of course, because it's so close everything now and you never know what's going to happen. So, yes.
Does it worry you that the Russians might invade, or does that feel quite a distant prospect?
It's a very difficult question. You think about it, but you don't think it can happen, but... Of course, yes, it's in my mind, it is. But I'm not that very, very worried, but maybe I should be, I don't know.
So you're happy that Sweden is boosting its defences? It's boosting its defences here in Gotland and in Sweden?
Yes, yes, I think we have to, because what's happening now in the world. So I think it's important. We've been so far away from it so many, many years, so it's a little bit new for me anyway, but yes, we've been talking a lot of the during the days here with the friends. What's going to happen with the world is so crazy, you don't know. It can change from one day to next day, so yeah. Well, I hope for the best.
We will now go to our final thoughts. And Dom, where do you want to leave listeners?
Thanks, Francis. I'd like to have a chat with everybody about the US strikes on Iran, and in particular the narrative that is starting to be shoved out there by Russia and elsewhere, as in, why is it okay for the US to bomb Iran, act of war, but not okay for Russia to take their special military operation against Ukraine? So that's the narrative that's starting to go out there, and I think it's worth us having a look at this, having a chat amongst ourselves, making sure that we know kind of what we're talking about. Forgive me for one moment. I'm just going to read you the text of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. It says, Nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defence if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Measures taken by members in the exercise of this right of self-defence shall be immediately reported to the Security Council and shall not in any way affect the authority and responsibility of the Security Council under the present charter to take at any time such action as it deems necessary in order to maintain or restore international peace and security. Now, I whiz through the last bit because that's the small print they get you on. But the first bit is the most important, that says nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defence if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. Now, that bit there, the if an armed attack bit, that is the stumbling block basically for where we are in the 21st century. Okay. The right of self-defence hinges on three considerations: necessity, proportionality, and the imminence of the threat. So is it necessary? Do you have to do it? Are there other ways that you could see off the threat? Could you run away? Could you, in this case, secure Iran not developing a nuclear weapon through diplomacy or what have you? So is military force necessary? Is it proportionate? To take this specifically, I think this was proportionate. It was 3 very accurate strikes, if that's what the battle damage assessment tells us, and it was a strike on a military target, very well telegraphed through open source media. I mean, they must have known it was coming. Was it an imminent threat? Now, that is a question we'll return to later. So those 3 things, necessity, proportionality, and the imminence of the threat, that is used to suggest whether or not you are justified in using force in self-defence. Okay, now this is where it all starts getting grey. Was it self-defence? Was it not self-defence? Is this a preemptive military strike? Etc., etc. Now, these ideas have developed since the UN Charter was first written and since humanity's experience post-Second World War. Numerous governments have been trying to adapt their foreign policy to take into account these ideas and these moments, these events that might allow them to break this convention of non-interference. In Britain, the Conservative Party in the early and mid-1990s were very heavily criticised for not acting over Rwanda and Bosnia. I've said before, the UN was designed to stop activity happening, and it was designed to stop World War III. It did it brilliantly, but by having that sort of central inertia towards doing nothing, the Security Council and the veto, the P5, that kind of thing, it allows the occasional diplomatic hernia of Rwanda, Bosnia, etc., etc. And we are now coming to say that's not acceptable any longer. But back in the 90s, the Conservative government was very heavily criticised. The Conservative Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, at the time, he said he was very sceptical about, and this is a quote, the concept of benevolent international interventionism. He later said he didn't really feel it was our job to send British soldiers to kill and be killed in defence of a particular faction in the Balkans. Now then, Tony Blair came to power in 1997, and in 1999 he said that view of foreign policy was too narrow-minded. He said acts of genocide can never be a purely internal matter. Values and interests merge. Now then, in 1998, Blair, he and the US, or Britain and the US, had bombed Iraq. I think Operation Desert Fox, I seem to remember. Airstrikes against Iraq. And Blair said, when the international community agrees certain objectives and then fails to implement them, those that can act must. And that led to the seminal moment in April 1999. He gave a speech in Chicago on the principles of liberal interventionism. And this all built into this idea of the R2P, responsibility to protect, which was a framework outlining the international community's responsibility to intervene in situations where a state was unable to look after its own population in the face of mass atrocities. This was the wars in the Balkans. So the idea was emerging that a state can take preemptive military action, can start a war, if you like, without having to act in self-defence. So that's where we are up to now. The concept, of course, of preemptive military action took a massive kick in the slats in Iraq 2003, but does still remain. And it is the justification, I think, that matters. So look at Russia's justification for their special military operation. Denazification, the expansion of NATO, all that kind of stuff, all the guff that we've spoken about for many, many years. Where's the necessity? Where's the proportionality? Where's the imminent threat, I would say, Mr. Putin, such that you had to go and invade this country? Now, as I've said, the US strikes on Iran. Yes, it was preemptive. Yes, there had been no armed attack on the United States, but look at it through the lenses of necessity. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, have been saying for a while that Iran is non-compliant, and their enrichment of uranium to 60% is very hard to justify for civilian use. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was on the radio this morning saying that Britain, we only enriched to 6% for our civilian use. So the IAEA say that Iran was non-compliant. Now, you could argue diplomacy has not worked, and therefore there was necessity for military action. What about proportionality? As I said, only 3 sites were hit, great precision, and after significant warning. So I think it does get a tick for proportionality. Now then, on imminence, this is very hard to judge. Numerous leaders, officials, heads of intelligence agencies have been warning for years of Iran getting closer to a breakout point of being able to weaponize uranium. So was it imminent? And does imminence mean hours or months or years, or when you're dealing with a nation getting a nuclear weapon with an avowed intent to destroy another country, Israel, and a track record of doing bad things on the international stage elsewhere? Over what time period do you judge imminence? So the point I'm making is the debate is going to rage over whether or not the US was justified, and indeed if the whole thing blooming worked. But I think it is simply wrong, incorrect to say that the US justification for striking Iran over the weekend means that Russia can also say they're entirely justified in invading Ukraine. They were both preemptive. They were both not in self-defense, no matter what Russia says. But I think they are two very, very different examples of where the world is now in terms of using preeminent military force to see off another threat. And therefore, I think as you hear these arguments put out by Russian state media and by their officials, and we're going to hear it amplified through their compliant media, that, well, it's exactly the same as the US bombing Iran. Why, what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't think it is. And I think there are very specific lenses that we can look at this thing through and analyse it through and analyse where we are in the 21st century to say, no, even though the UN Charter is arguably out of date, the way that it has been updated through practice and through Blair's speech in Chicago in 1999, responsibility to protect, liberal interventionism, whatever you want to call it, I think we're at a place now where we can analyse it differently. And I do not think that the US strikes on Iran were anything like the same moral justification as Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, thanks very much, Dom. No doubt we'll get a lot of correspondence on this subject, and we welcome that. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom, Nicholls and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.